This is a PhD talk by Paula Stranden, who is an interdisciplinary designer and PhD researcher who develops and builds multisensory mixed reality experience. She is a co-founder of Soft Bodies and Virtual Fruits. Paula studied at Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna and INSPAN Paris Marrakech before graduating from the Ballard School of Architecture, UCL, with experience working for Archidez, Ram Labo, and Herzog and Maron. Paula continuously explores the imagery spatial potential with VR, AR, and mixed reality environments. Paula has led a series of VR workshops in London and abroad, tutored at Butler's summer school program, and holds a teaching position at the Architectural Association. Paula's speculative mixed reality work has been exhibited at Films and Design Festivals internationally, as well as Royal Academy of Arts, the Estonia Museum of Architecture, and I Film Museum Amsterdam. Today, her lecture will be based on virtual reality. VR is predominantly used in architecture practice for its visual capacities, becoming just another mode of digital representation. This lecture explores VR potential beyond its visual territory and probes how it can be used to explore multi-modalities of spatial experience and atmosphere by presenting a series of one-to-one interactive models and experiment mixed reality installation. VR in architecture will be discussed from phenomenologically perspective and exam for its potential to facilitate more intuitive and embodied design and for the better design making process. So welcome, Paula.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for the introduction. I will start by sharing my screen. So today I'd like to start my presentation with a little exercise. So I think as we've all seen enough screens and moving images in the last weeks and month, I would ask all of you to close your eyes. So it is important that all of you do it. So if you just sit still and lean back on your chair and just close your eyes. So start by feeling your hands. Take one hand into the other. Let them touch each other. Now slowly lower your hands and put them on the table in front of you. What is it made of? Is it hard? Is it warm or cold? What is on this table? Maybe your fingers encounter an object. Now slowly move your hands further back to the chair that you're sitting on. How does it feel? What kind of texture does it have? What is below you? What's the surface like beneath your feet? Is there a wall behind you or a window to your side? What do you hear now? If you imagine that the things that your body touches, those things that meet your hands, those that your feet feel, those things that your legs rest on, and those that your ears hear. If you imagine that their surfaces are merely a fragment of a world only you can perceive, what would that world be like? What can you see with your inner eye? Where are you now? So please open your eyes. I've done this little exercise with you to present to you my main research interest, which is the felt space. That space that exists between you and the things our body encounters and interacts with, which is precisely the space that I'm interested in exploring through virtual reality. So I'm Paula Strund. I recently started my PhD at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. And I started working with virtual reality while I was working for Herzog in Basel, doing 360 visualizations for client meetings, which then led me to the film-based Unit 24 at the Bartlett School of Architecture, where I graduated also with a location-based VR experience. And then after graduating, I co-founded Soft Bodies with John Cruz and David Fluke, as well as Virtual Fruits, which is an educational XR initiative. And yeah, basically today what I'd like to do is to present to you a selection of works that I have done either myself, as for example, my graduation work, Microtopia, or in collaboration with John Cruz from Soft Bodies as the research-led design project Weightless Bricks. And then also, yeah, one work that was exhibited at the Biennale in Tallinn, and towards the end give you a little outlook into the research that I'm doing as part of the PhD. And then, yeah, as Ollie already said, I'd like to open up the discussion and be happy to discuss the questions you might have, or like any ideas or speculations towards these themes and topics. So maybe just a very quick background before diving into Microtopia is my general approach to VR. So these are like film stills from the first VR experience I've done. And it's just very important that I was never really interested in this very like visual approach to virtual reality and doing these like photorealistic renderings or quite like, close to reality simulation, but it was always very much about trying to find a language that is really native to the medium. So that works a lot with abstraction within the visual, and then rather explores like the potential of this multidimensionality and really looking for a way to work with VR that really explores the medium to its fullest. And then, I quickly started going to work with game engines, started working with Unity, and the work became more and more interactive and also embodied. So I'm just showing you these experiments that were made prior to developing my master thesis in order to show you a bit like the experimental mode I took towards VR while doing my master studies. And then I think a bit as like a historic backdrop to Microtopia is that my approach to virtual reality in general is not so much within the devices that we currently use. Like I really see these devices as its current kind of technological manifestation, but the idea behind virtual reality and how it was developed and why it was developed starting in the 1960s was kind of the grandfather of VR, Morten Heilig, and that Sensorama. But then also people like even Sutherland or Jaron Lanier, who are very much interested in this, in the movement within the digital content that these virtual reality interface allowed you, and also the interface in itself. So I think these these references from the past and these quite experimental and explorative approaches to the technology and what it could be have been very influential in the way that I started setting up my practice of working with virtual reality. So it's very much informed by these early explorations with the technology. So Microtopia in particular is a location-based virtual reality installation. And as you see here in the first image is a set of physical objects that upon moving through these objects allow you to open up these very vast infinite virtual environments. So you see a person wearing a headset and then not having any controllers, but really like interacting with the interface, which are the physical objects with their bare hands, thanks to the Leap Motion camera. So the interface actually becomes a setup of physical furniture pieces, which in the case of Microtopia is the design for like a future domesticity. So the idea is that you have these objects on this minimal floor plan arrangement that each open up these like typologies of the home once you interact with them. So they have a voice, they speak to you, and they try to kind of seduce you into these imaginary environments that are informed by like architectural references, but also dreams and rather like these moods and atmospheres that we know of spaces or memories. So it's very much about these elusive qualities that a space can communicate. On these two images, you see this, for example, the sink. So when you're in the library, the sink will come from the ceiling and will ask you to come towards it and like put your hands into the cold water. And if you do so, so only the moment your hands touch the surface of the water, you will enter the next space. So they are like little portals that take you through, your home. And then this is just a screenshot of the model. So you see a bit how it's being set up. So you have this grid with these furniture pieces in the center, and then above each of these pieces, you have another space overlaying it. So you have this kind of multitude of spaces overlaying the same floor plan. So it's really about extending the home, but also overlaying it and adding these dimensions through VR. This is when you sit on the chair, for example, you get into this library space. And then this is a little sequence of the installation being set up at a film festival, where when you're lying on the bed, the fireplace will come and will lure you to come through it. And even if the fireplace doesn't physically exist, because you have seen it before, everybody really tries to go through it. And that's a very interesting moment in how this combination between physical objects and virtual environments really starts guiding your behavior within that space and your experience of that space. And this is just an overview of like the different environments you go through. At the end of the presentation, I have some links to the recordings of the experience, so you can take some time to look at them if you're interested. The next work I'd like to speak about is the installation called Weightless Bricks, Act 1 production. So this is part of a research project that I started with Soft Bodies with David and John, and I got commissioned by the Royal Academy to develop an installation for their architecture studio. And then building on the findings of Microetopia, we set up that installation that also expanded the architecture studio of the Royal Academy. So it's really to question, okay, what are these elements that we interact with in our everyday life, in our physical reality with? So, for example, the door or the table or the chair, like what could they become within these virtual environments and in the overlay between them? So we went into detail also what could, questioning a bit the design language of these things, because what's really interesting, of course, is then if you are in VR, suddenly the visual is not the main driver of the design within the physical world, but it's much more about the touch of the object, like the tactile feedback you have, the way you use them, the way you interact with them with your body, the weight that they have, potentially the temperature that they have. And all of these things can really give you like an information about the world that you're in. So this little seat, for example, we call it like the cloud mobile. So the moment you're in the seat, like you start traveling, you start like moving a certain distance within the virtual reality experience. And so it's really, questioning the role of objects that they could play within that world that somehow exists between the virtual and the physical. And then there's this one thing that I think, in general, it's always a problem about VR, that it's this very solitary experience, and that there's only one person being able to experience this at a time, and it's very hard to share these, the thoughts you have in there and how you very intuitively react, of course, because it very much happens in the moment. So it became important to basically build an experience for two to be in there together. And in a nutshell, Weightless Bricks Act 2 is a network location-based VR installation that allows two people to interact with each other in the same virtual environment while being physically apart. And John and I began looking at the subject in 2018, considering a virtual workspace like any other room your home. Yet rather than walking through a doorway, you could access other tailor-made worlds through interactions with bespoke physical objects, furniture, or decorations. And yeah, of course, like everyone else, we could not have predicted the situation we're facing today, as we are also doing this talk today through Zoom. And yeah, how the pandemic has exposed all of us to experimenting with these alternate workspaces, particularly at home. And I think in the end that, yeah, today more than ever, we're yearning for our homes to be expanded and to make room for these extra modes of living. And yeah, when we enter the Zoom call, we all put on these professional personas, and I think it is because we need our minds to step out of the home and occupy this professional space to work effectively, despite our bodies physically remaining near our place of rest, security, and intimacy. So as we contact our work partners over long distances, John and I really realized that this distance also is a necessity to create new spaces. So we came up with this concept of long distance space, we call it. And it sits a bit within the history of like long distance communication. So being able to share words through letters, like first written, then spoken, then sharing images over video calls and any kind of chats, and first still images, then by now moving images. We started thinking that it really becomes time to be able not only to share two-dimensional content, but to share three-dimensional content, like to share space, regardless of where we are. So the idea of Weightless Bricks, Act 2 collaboration, is really to allow two people to share anything through non-verbal means. So they share the same three-dimensional environment, and they can they become aware of each other's embodied interactions, of each other's gestures, of each other's consequences that the actions have within these spaces. And yeah, the general idea is, so it's also kind of mirroring the way that John and me have been working. So me being in the Netherlands and John being in London, and then both within our work environments being able to share space through that VR experience. And then these are some images of how it has been set up at Art Space in Eindhoven. So for the physical exhibition, we decided to place these two play areas next to each other. But yeah, it is important that what you can basically see here is that you have these two circles, and these two circles could be anywhere. So yeah, as I said before, like one is in London, one is in Amsterdam, and then both people enter their VR experience, and the moment they have the headset on and they pick up these objects, their spaces are overlaying. So in the end, they embody the same virtual environment, and they also somehow even embody each other's bodies, because they are having four hands to interact within that garden, and they really have to collaborate in order to cultivate that garden. So you have this watering can and rake, and then your actions just consist of gardening. So you rake the floor, you plant these little seeds, you water the seeds, these flowers grow, you start picking the berries, and you really, you spend as much time as you like within that space that coexists to your physical setups, in order to, like the idea is not, there's no particular aim to that experience, but to really think about the potential of how communication could be if it were not only through our verbal means of sharing and discussing content over distance. We chose the theme of gardening, but of course, like it could also be another theme. Like we developed different scenarios, thinking about kind of like speculative work position one might be able to have in the future, like the empathy educator, or the cloud cleaner, like cleaning each other's digital footprint, the conscious consultant. So there are all these like speculative work scenarios that we used as a bit like, yeah, mind games to explore, okay, what could this spatial representation of these be if we were to inhabit this virtual environments in addition to our physical while working. One other installation I did was more within an architectural context. It was entitled The Talking Trees of Tallinn and developed for the Architecture Biennale. And here again, you see that there are physical fragments, and each of these fragments is overlaid with a virtual environment, while in this case it was more like an Excel setup. So each of the object was designed by a different architect. So for example, there's like the wooden cube made by Fujimoto, and then also overlaid with his design of like the future habitat. So basically by going through this birch forest and touching one piece by the other, you would enter the different architects' designs. And in the context of this exhibition, it was really important that you have this element where you would not only see images or films or like look into drawings of these future designs, but really have the experience through movements, through tactility, to interact with the content and experience in a very different way. So the aesthetics of these environments was very reduced. It was only black and white. It was only about like the light and the shade, and more about the positioning within these buildings and like the size of the space you would find yourself in. And then it was very much about the sound and the way how you started moving into it. And yeah, this is like an iteration that was also set up at the AA as part of the symposium. So the physical objects were also adapted into only like the materiality of the designs. And yeah, just some screenshot of the piece just to show that it was very reduced within the visual and really thought more about the way how you position yourself within these spaces. And yeah, that already takes me to my last point, which is my PhD research. And the preliminary title is Simulating Atmospheres, Digitizing Embodied Design and Decision-Making Processes in Architecture. And the PhD is within like a European research framework on tacit knowledge in architecture. So there are 10 PhD students distributed across Europe, really researching on what might this implicit knowledge be and how we can start communicating and discussing it that's embedded within the architectural design process. And I'm looking into the potential of these virtual and mixed reality interfaces. And as I showed you the diagram in the beginning, to me, it's really about finding out a bit. I think I'm very fascinated by these early approaches to virtual reality, as I showed the images by Morten Heilig and Ivan Sutherland, that were thinking of the VR interface not so much as a screen, but rather like a device that allows you to track your body within a digital environment and to interact in a novel way with the digital content. So I think this diagram just shows you this like interrelation that exists when you build these mixed reality experiences, saying that you move with your body through a certain space and you interact with these objects, and upon interacting with them and what you do and how you do it, this triggers different spatial environments. And that space, again, as you saw in the video of somebody stepping up from the bed and going through the fireplace, it really guides your movement again in a certain way, which then allows you to interact with other objects. So the way we start thinking about space somewhat changes that in the experience that I made building these installations, is that it's only partly about this visual auditory space that is being kind of explored by the headset, But then also what becomes very important is that like the movement, the kinesthetic, the thermal, and yeah, also the vestibular space that you really perceive through the changing of your body position, and then all the kind of impressions that they can embed within the physical objects. So there's like the tactile, the olfactory, you can even have the gustatory space. And I really like to see that as being embedded within our physical reality, and to also keep it that way. So it's not at all to use VR in order to flee reality or to be kind of excluded from it, but it's much more to see it as an additional overlay, and as like almost like a zoning that exists in addition to it. Like we all have our very like personal kind of space that is not visible, but that's very much perceptive to each other. And then this is just a little diagram of my methods, looking like into phenomenology and architecture, and then also into like cognitive neuroscience and neurostatic, and how that might relate to VR when we think about it in architectural terms. And what becomes very important, of course, like in this design-based research that I'm doing, are these XR design experiments. And to just show you like 2-3 images, there's the first experiment that I did during quarantine, which was to overlay my work desk in Amsterdam with a kind of like a narrative by Alison Smithson written about Saint-Jeroming and the allegorical meaning of Saint-Jerome study space. And then through a series of tactile objects, allowing me to enter these reenactments of these spaces and kind of extending the walls of my home. And I think what has really stayed with me through this experiment is this idea of the moment you, I mean, now myself, for example, like sitting in this space, like I'm here, like a perception of my body. As we did this little exercise in the beginning, you have like all these objects around you. You have like your table and I don't know, your glass of water on it. And then as like a second layer, you have the feeling of your walls of your room kind of encapsulating you. And what's really interesting if you go and start working with mixed reality is that the virtual equivalent of both your hands as well as the object, as well as the space that you build, are made of the same material, so to say. So it's always hard to speak about these things because they're very experiential and they're very much about actually like, trying it and working with it oneself. But it's a very particular kind of realization for your brain that the world that you're interacting with and the way you become part of it is very much made out of the same material. So this has led me to the experiment that I'm currently working on, which is entitled Exploring the Infrathin. And this is a philosophical experiment based on a loose collection of handwritten notes written by Duchamp, found after his death, about the notion of infrathin. And this is a term that he coined, and in French it's inframince. And he describes this notion. I mean, he says you can't really describe it, you can only give examples. And the examples are, for example, if you sit on a chair and it's still warm by the person who has left it just before you, or if you smoke a cigarette and you exhale and then the smoke would smell of your breath as well as the smoke of the cigarette, or the way how when you mold an object that the mold will never be identical, the difference between like the two molds. So it's really this not describable, or like this difference or this notion between two things that are identical but you can't really define it. So what I'm currently doing is to make a revisit of this term through these mixed reality installations and experiences, and then really looking at this, this overlay in detail that exists between the physical and the virtual world, and how they relate to each other, and how it actually tricks with or makes us better understand the way how our brain perceives the objects we interact with and the spaces we are or we embed ourselves in. So again, this will be an experiment about embodied interactions, and I'm happy to share more with you once it's being built. But I think for now that's it. It's like a little overview of what I've kind of done, or like a little selection of what I've done. I will stop sharing my screen.